Hello and welcome back, everyone, to FIDF Live. I'm Lara Krinsky, and today we are honored to welcome back our longtime friend, someone whose voice in our community we've come to trust and respect, as well as around the world. He is Israel's former director of the National Public Diplomacy Unit at the Prime Minister's office, where he was the point person for coordinating how Israel tells its story to the world. This was on matters of national security, in diplomacy, and conflict. He's helped to shape how Israel engages global audiences during high-stakes moments. And as a human rights attorney, a special forces veteran, and the author of 11 Days in Gaza, Gadi truly brings a rare combination of frontline experience, strategic insight, narrative wisdom to both what Israel is doing and how it can explain it. So today we're talking about the many things that are happening in the world. And Gadi, thank you so much for being with us.
Shalom, Lara. It's an honor to be here.
To kick us off, let's talk about Gaza. Obviously we're going to get to Iran. We're going to get to what is happening over there. And there's a lot to discuss. But let's start with Gaza. There's this ongoing debate, it seems, about how weakened Hamas really is after a lot of pressure and ceasefire pressures. But, can you tell us from your vantage point where we stand, as it seems there's a lot of pressure to move ahead into new phases where the disarmament of Hamas is really questionable?
Well, I would say, Lara, it's not really questionable. It's a matter of a fact that Hamas is not dismantled. Hamas still exists. It still has tens of thousands of armed terrorists under its wings, and there are certain territories within the Gaza Strip that are under the full control of Hamas. Israel is in control of more than 50% of the Gaza Strip within a territory we call the Yellow Line. By the way, the fact that this area is controlled does not necessarily mean it is neutralized. We still know about terrorists trying to invade the Yellow Line and about terrorist tunnels that appear within from the Yellow Line area and tackling IDF soldiers on a daily basis, literally. Now, you said it pretty much the way it is. There's a lot of pressure from the American administration and other key partners to move forward to stage B. As we all know, thank God, the hostages are back. And now Trump's 20 points peace plan talks about demilitarizing Gaza and rehabilitating Gaza. Now, in order to do that, there is an entire structure that was formed with the Peace Board and the International Stabilization Force, etc. But as we said at the beginning, Hamas is still not demilitarized. And there is a very interesting dynamic and balance that we are trying to achieve. On the one hand, Israel says we're not going to withdraw from the Yellow Line, as agreed, by the way, until Hamas is dismantled and disarmed, while other key stakeholders are saying we need to push this and move this forward because we need to make some substantive progress. And the result of this interesting dynamic is that despite the fact that Hamas is still not disarmed, in reality, there is a progress that signals that we might be facing more and more evidence of Palestinian sovereignty within the Gaza Strip without Hamas being dismantled. Few examples for that. The stamps that we see Palestinians are getting in the Rafah crossing, kind of resembling the stamps of the Palestinian Authority. The symbol of the Peace Board resembles the Palestinian Authority's eagle. We know that right now there is a constant recruitment of policemen to handle Gaza's interior situations, and we know for sure that there are going to be some Hamas previous terrorists who are going to apply for these positions. And the fear among many is that even if we were to get to a certain situation or a status in which many of the stakeholders will say, well, Hamas no longer exists, substantially, Hamas will still be there because it's going to be the same entity with just a different costume. Now, how does Israel balance that? How do we ensure that Hamas is truly, substantially Disarmed, this is a political mission, even before it's a military mission. And the government's challenge would be to convince Trump and the US administration, as well as the allies, about certain criterions for dismantling Hamas. This is not a subjective issue. There needs to be objective criterions for dismantling Hamas. And after we agree on them, we need to follow them and ensure they actually being operated on the ground.
So interesting. Let me ask, Hamas knows, I'm sure, that they're being asked to disappear, that they're being asked to go away. And so I'm just wondering, like, even with the example of the stamps, like, could that just be a ruse, an optics ploy, so that the West kind of believes that the Palestinians are gaining more, more agency, but in actuality, it's just a tactic?
In Hebrew we say, "התודעה מעצבת את ההוויה," which means the consciousness shapes the being, the presence, right? So things that might be perceived as optics has substantial meaning on the ground. The bottom line is, Lara, that whoever holds the weapon and the gun has the control in the territory. And Hamas right now is the only sovereign entity in control of all the territories in the Gaza Strip that are outside of the yellow line. This means that we can get to a really tricky situation in which all the stakeholders are pushing for a Palestinian sovereignty, while the only entity holding the gun, meaning having control on the territory and therefore maintaining the sovereignty, is Hamas. Now, that brings up really tough questions, Lara. We are after more than 2 years of war. We've lost soldiers. We paid a very heavy price. And people are asking, is this the result we really wanted to achieve? Returning the hostage was, of course, the most urgent and important thing. And I claimed more than once that this is a condition to restore the Israeli sense of lost sovereignty that we have experienced on October 7th. But if at the end of the day, Hamas is going to be the only entity holding a weapon in the Gaza Strip, while being in control of a territory called a Palestinian statehood that has a Palestinian statehood, then I'm not sure this is the outcome we all hoped for.
That leads me to my last question on this topic before we move on to the others, which is, what does it mean for our soldiers? Obviously, FIDF, we're always wanting to know about the well-being of the soldiers, and how can Israel continue to have a presence in Gaza to ensure that it doesn't devolve in the way that it has in the past, if we see that Hamas is just, secretly arming itself and trying to regain power, and it's in it for the long game? Like, what does this mean for our soldiers after 2 years of war, to your point, and everything?
That's a great question. And first of all, let me tell you, I wish it was secretly. They are doing it very openly, and I'm talking about using drones that can carry, tens of kilograms of weapons on a daily basis. Each drone can carry tens of kilograms, and I'm talking about multiple drones a day. So they are being armed very openly, not hiding this, and preparing themselves for the next round. Now, what does this mean for us who are supporting the IDF and are also part of the IDF? It's interesting you're asking this, because right now I was supposed to be in a mission with my battalion in the yellow line. My unit is right now in the yellow line. I'm not there for technical reasons. And what that does mean is that the war hasn't really ended. The October 7th war has ended officially, but the threat is still there. This means we will have to make sure that our soldiers are being supported, treated, has all the conditions to handle the challenges. And this means also that we cannot allow ourselves mentally think that the threats are over, because this is surely not the case. Unfortunately, we still have to go to sleep with one sword next to our bed and make sure we protect the state of Israel and the land of Israel and the people of Israel, because the enemy is still there.
Wow. It's amazing that the soldiers are able to retain focus and to retain readiness after what must be such exhaustion, and now pivoting. Like, the entire country of Israel is exhausted, as they've been on this state of alert now for weeks, with talk of an impending strike from Iran, and we're seeing like U.S. military, send its forces, and it's been amassed in a way that we haven't seen in decades. So let me ask you the $1,000,000 question, Gadi, as we're looking at Purim 2026, and we're facing the Iranian foe yet again, the Jewish people. Can you tell us, like, what is the risk of an imminent strike on Israel, and what are the signals? What can we take away from what we're seeing with the U.S.'s presence in the region? What do you forecast?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to relate to something very interesting you said, Lara. It is an exhausting dynamic. We're not exhausted. We're protecting the country,
We all love to hear that.
and we are Israelis, and we are ready to protect our homeland whenever we are asked to do that, and the Jewish people, by the way. Now, as for the million or the $1,000,000,000 questions regarding the Iran, U.S., Israel dynamic, well, first, nobody really knows besides one person how this is going to evolve. And you don't need to be a genius to know who that person is. He sits in the Oval Office in the White House. But what we can do is to look at the dynamic and the interest of each side and then evaluate if we're closer to escalation or an agreement. Let's take a look at the US side for a second, Lara. The US's main interest is stabilization. Trump wants stability because he needs to make substantive progress with his mega strategic initiatives in the region. I'm talking about IMEC, the International Economic Corridor, from India through the Middle East to Europe, and the Peace Board. Let me tell you a secret. There is not a specific secretive bomb that can replace a regime. And therefore, if we are under the risk of collapsing Iran and creating a chaos, then the US might realize that it's not in its interest to get the entire region into such a chaos. This is not the case of Venezuela, in which you could have taken Maduro but not replaced the regime, by the way. This is a different ballgame. The second is we also need to take into account the mentality of the negotiators in the room. Put any negotiator in the room and tell him or her, well, you might succeed in your, we are going to a war. The mentality would be going to war is a personal failure. So the negotiators will always seek to get an agreement. And the third thing we need to take into account from the US's side is a strong push from substantive sides in the Republican Party against involvement in the region for obvious reasons. Let's pivot to Iran for a second. Iran's main interest is not stability, but survival. They can promise anything to survive. That means their maximum could potentially meet the minimum of the United States of America. Also add into account that they have no problems, they have zero problem of marketing any bad agreement from their side as a success in Farsi. They have done that multiple times in the past, including after Rising Lion. According to the Ayatollah regime's narrative, they have won Rising Lion. And the third thing is they are looking way farther than the 3 years of the Trump administration in the White House. They are playing for the long run, and they are one of the most sophisticated negotiators in the world. So when you look at that, it might seem that achieving an agreement is not so remote. It's certainly not certain, and we can get into an escalation, but it's not, a completely imaginary scenario. Now, looking at those two sides and then look at Israel, I can tell you two things. The first is that Israel is prepared. It is ready. It's even more prepared than Rising Lion. We have made conclusions. We have learned. There are a lot of assessments, and we are ready both in the attack and the defensive aspects of it. I'm talking about both Air Force, intelligence, and home front command. Of course, it's not going to be easy. It's a tragic situation. It's extremely challenging. And yes, people want to get this over with. But that leads me to the second thing I want to say. Eventually, the problem is not the nuclear program or the ballistic missiles. The problem is the Ayatollah regime. That is the source of all the problems. The Ayatollah regime is one of the greatest, or perhaps the greatest, accelerator of anti-Semitism since the Third Reich. And therefore, until this regime is fallen, we are going to see and experience those problems time and again. So many here hope that despite the fact that might be, lead to very challenging 2, 3, 4 weeks until the regime is falling, we understand that we need to hold on and therefore earn a much more stabilized, tranquil reality in the region for days to come and years to come. Again, going back to the first point, no one really knows what's going to happen, but Israel is ready, and the cooperation between the US administration and the Israeli one is extremely, extremely high.
So let me ask you, that was an incredible synopsis. And there's so many things we can follow up on. So let me start. The first one is, I think that for a lot of the people who are listening right now, there's a thought that if there's any administration that's going to understand that the Ayatollah's word and the Ayatollah's rhetoric is not trustworthy, and that the agreements are never upheld, and that Iran will say, that the regime will say that they are adhering and even offer fake documentation, but still have the centrifuges spinning. It's this administration. So there's this idea that we don't want to see what's happened in the past, where we just extend the runway of Iran even further, especially because an administration that understands that doesn't come around so very often, let's say. So do you think that even though going to war might be considered a failure, that there's an interest in dealing with it once and for all, even from the American side, because there isn't just sort of the faith that that America will step up in the future, since it hasn't for so many decades and before now?
Yeah, I don't think anyone in the US administration thinks that the Ayatollah regime is a trustworthy regime. And I truly believe that everyone in the US administration wants to see the Ayatollah regime replaced. There is a consensus about this. The only challenge is it's the application of these beliefs, meaning if there was a very extremely high certainty that conducting an operation will for sure lead to the fall of the Ayatollah regime and not to a collapse of a country into sub-entities, for example, and create an entire chaos in the region, then that's a different story. But that is not the case, Lara, because the alternative of not succeeding to replace the Ayatollah regime could be that the Ayatollah regime is still standing, but it can also lead to a situation in which we are not predicting, meaning Khamenei is down, but as I said, the entire country is being collapsed to sub-entities. And in that reality, even more unexpected units or entities are gaining control over ballistic missiles or other weapons. And that poses a threat not only to the state of Israel, but to other countries in the region who are allies of the United States of America. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, I'm talking about Qatar, I'm talking about Egypt, Turkey, etc. So that can be an extremely challenging situation, very delicate. I'm certain that if there was a very probable alternative of replacing Khamenei, taking him down, and then ensuring that the regime that is being left is, working accordingly to the way the U.S. administration wants, like in Venezuela, that was a different story. That is not the case in Iran. And we might be experiencing a situation in which, despite the fact Khamenei is being taken down, or some other figures in the leadership, like we've experienced, by the way, in Rising Lion, the entire Ayatollah regime would still be in control, generally speaking. So this is an extremely, extremely challenging situation right now, and the alternatives are very, very uncertain.
So interesting. Can you explain how the inner unrest that we've seen in the streets of Iran, is that a factor at all? Is the regime further weakened? We know it's economically weak. We know that there's unrest within. If there was some kind of a war, could that be the cocktail that brings it down if the people rise up again? Or do you feel like that moment has really passed? What it has Does it play a role in what happens next, essentially?
So history shows that it depends. During Rising Lion, people thought, hey, that is the chance of the opposition in Iran to take power and finish the job from within. That didn't happen. As a matter of fact, what we saw is a rise of national sentiment among many Iranians saying, hey, we want this regime to be falling, but we don't want our cities to be bombed by a different entity. That was a sentiment that was existed as well. On the other hand, we saw that a few weeks ago when we had all the protests and the horrifying massacre of the Ayatollah regime in Iranian protesters, that didn't lead to a kinetic involvement of either the US or Israel. Now, this shows you that first, a kinetic involvement or a physical attack isn't necessarily going to lead to more protests. And on the other hand, that a lot of protests are not necessarily going to lead to a kinetic attack. So we know that Iran is extremely weaker, both domestically, but also externally. A lot of anti-aircraft systems have been eliminated by the State of Israel during Rising Lion. And also a lot of their intel sources have been damaged. At the end of the day, Lara, it really depends on the timing and on the atmosphere, but also on the productive information campaigns that the US and Israel will initiate that will accompany such a kinetic attack. Meaning, if the protesters will understand that this is their last chance, it's happening right now, we're taking it full force, now it's your job to finish it from within, then things might happen. But we are experiencing this regime for over 25 years now, and it still hasn't been replaced. So history obligates us to be a bit more modest in our assessments, still be hopeful, but understand that even if the greatest empire in the world, the United States of America, will attack Iran, that is not guaranteeing the fact that the opposition will join from within and take down the Ayatollah regime.
Thank you. So we know when it comes to a lot of these terrorist organizations that dates are very symbolic, that they choose the dates, anniversary dates, holidays. There's a lot of thought behind when they choose to attack and when things happen. For us, Purim is coming up, so it's interesting that here comes the confrontation potentially between Israel and the United States and Iran. That's very interesting. But from their perspective, how does Ramadan play into this and the timing of that holy war? Is that a factor? And do you see that impacting sort of the righteousness of the cause or any of the strikes that are ahead?
So the thing about Ramadan is that each year when Ramadan comes, and by the way, unlike the Jewish holidays, Ramadan starts in a different date. Each year it is being determined quite on the spot or a day or two before. Not going to Islam studies right now, so we're not going to shift the entire conversation. But the interesting thing about Ramadan is this. Each year, Israel is preparing towards Ramadan. It is trying to contain and prevent escalation because we all know Ramadan is an extremely sensitive period in time, right? But if you think about it really, why does it has to be a sensitive period in time? There has been a normalization of escalation during this time. This is the first Ramadan after the war, really, and it means it also bears an opportunity. For many years, through either TV series, school curriculum, social media posts, we got used to the fact that during the time of Ramadan, many Palestinians think that violence is a bit slightly more legitimate means. This is not a force majeure. This is not something that is written in the sky. It is something that we got used to live with, and each year we're playing the same dynamic. We get to Ramadan, we have more forces conducting operations on the field, we're trying to prevent escalation, we're done with Ramadan, everyone is relieved, and there we're waiting for the next Ramadan to come. I'm saying this Ramadan is an opportunity because after the war, the world has changed for many of us, and including that is the relationship between us and our enemies and the way we perceive holy months or holy dates throughout the calendar. And I think there is a chance right now to try and change the perception of Ramadan throughout the year, not from the religious point of view, God forbidden, but try to combat the violence and extremism and incitement accelerators throughout the year. So in 10 or 20 years from now, Lara, Muslim kids or Palestinian kids wouldn't think that this period of a month is a period in which it's a bit more legitimate to be violence. The perception regarding Ramadan, rather than the combating violence during Ramadan, is the main Israeli challenge when we're looking really for the long term right now. As I said, this is the first Ramadan, but it can be, after the war, it could be the first out of many in which we are trying to change the entire perception regarding Ramadan. And it will happen only if Israel would set this as a strategic goal for the next 10 and 20 years. This means we will have to apply a lot of measures throughout the entire year, not just, a month before Ramadan comes. It is extremely challenging, but it is very doable.
That's so optimistic, and we love to hear that. But it's also much bigger than addressing the Palestinian population. You mentioned earlier that Iran is fomenting anti-Semitism, of course, also Qatar. Like, these are the fomenters of anti-Semitism on the scale of the Third Reich, through social media and college campuses around the world. Like, a lot of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing is as a result of the brainwashing. So it's the violence is following the brainwash. So it's so critical that Israel addresses it as a true strategic threat, as the eighth front, as we call it. Do you know how Israel is planning to address that? Because from where we sit in the diaspora, we just see the growth. It just seems like it's going on such an exponential trajectory.
Well, I think our presence in the Board of Peace can present an opportunity here, right? And in order to combat incitement during the month of Ramadan, first, as I said, we need to decide this is a strategic goal of the State of Israel. And to do that, generally speaking, we're not going to lay an entire plan in this discussion, Lara, of course, but we need to divide that into offensive and defensive measurements. So in the defensive measurements, what we need to do is to map the incitement accelerators, either to arrest or take down inciting content, either from social media or school curriculum, even in the famous Ramadan TV series, to try to legally work towards taking down some of these very extremely anti-Semitic TV series that are being screened all over the Arab world. But we can try at least to control those who are being screened in our region, at least in Israel, right? For the Israeli Arabs who are also subjects to these extreme content. And on the offensive side, and it's interesting because offensive might sound violent, but I mean the exact opposite, or the proactive side, if you'd like, to try, first of all, to echo and stress those who are presenting a more moderate tolerance narrative that symbolizes what the month of Ramadan truly is, to try to change the operational policy towards, people who want to actually practice the holy month, which are under the age of 50 but are not posing a true threat in Temple Mount. So there are various actions that we can do. And of course, we will learn a lot as we start in this journey. But if we are not going to start, and if we're not going to set this as a strategic goal, we'll never find out. And we will just we're going to be doomed to repeat the same dynamic of a violent Ramadan, or at least a very sensitive Ramadan, year after year after year. This is a cycle we must end.
Couldn't agree more. As a final question, I'd love to bring it down to a more personal level. You talked earlier about how your unit is right now deployed. Can you tell us what is the headspace of the soldiers in your unit? And you talked about how Israel is ready. Can you just give us a glimpse more into, what the soldiers are thinking, what they're feeling, and how they're readying themselves for what could be another wave, another war, or hopefully, none of that, but really having to sort of context shift and be ready for anything at any time?
Wow, that's a really good question. So on the one hand, people are continuing to show up. They care, and I always say that in my talks. They of course come because of the national aspects. They care about the country, the anthem, the flag, the land, but they also come for each other. They want to protect their friends and they want to be there. But again, they understand the mission. They understand that there is a monster on the other side of the line, and we don't want this monster to reach our families again like it did on October 7th. On the other hand, they are consuming news. When I'm on a TV panel, I'm getting messages from all of my battalion friends, and making comments and making jokes, etc. They consume the news and they have their own questions on where this is going. Some, of course, are supporting of the current policy. Some are objecting, and it's their prerogative and it's their own right. What's important to understand is that we are all, either if you're left or right, and this is not a political discussion, but I'm saying even if you're left or right, we are all trying to see and understand where this is going right now, because we're all living in a status of uncertainty regarding Gaza. These are an extremely, extremely historic times in which the region is being shaped from scratch, literally. Take 5 years from now, Lara, every scenario that you and I can put on the table is reasonable. Now, we are all questioning where is our administration and the US administration and the partners in the border of peace are going to take this region. What we want to make sure is that all the effort and the time away from the family and the sacrifices are not in vain. They're being invested properly. We're going to show up no matter what, anytime, regardless of any decision. We're going to be there because we understand the greater cause, which is defending the state of Israel and the Jewish people as a whole. But we also hope, and it's not contradicting, we also hope that this is going to lead to a place in which my kid, who's only 4 years young right now, is not going to have to be in the yellow line. He's going to read about this in history book. Lara, just 2 days ago, a soldier from my unit was killed. And this is extremely, extremely heartbreaking. So, people are kind of back in their reality, in their daily routine, which is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. This is why we're doing this. So people will go back to their daily lives. We're constantly getting these reminders that the enemy is still there, that the general, larger war is still there. And what you guys need to know is that we're going to be there, and we're extremely thankful for this support, no matter what. Because, and I always say this again, we're all part of this Zionist project. Each and every one of us is holding the stretcher from a different angle, and Israel is no more mine than it's yours. So really thank you for everything that you're doing, also through this briefing, ensuring that vital information is getting into our, to our partners and your wonderful audience. This is the true definition of Zionism and being part of something larger.
Thank you so, so much, Gadi. Your insights are truly so illuminating, and we're so grateful to have you as part of our family. So thank you so, so much. We know that your time is so limited, and we're grateful that you always make time for us. We don't take it for granted. Thank you.
My pleasure, Lara.
What's clear today is that Israel's challenges aren't just military, they're diplomatic, they're perceptual, they're moral, And in time like these, the strength of our support, which is grounded in clarity, in truth, and an unshakable connection to Israel's story, matters so deeply. Thank you for joining us today. Please keep speaking up for our soldiers, showing up for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel. Together, we can overcome anything. And with our soldiers at the helm, our future is safe. So please stay with us. And if this conversation was meaningful for you, please share it. Please get the word out. Am Yisrael Chai.